targeting of indigenous women for removal from their lands, legally and physically. Yet passage of time has not lessened these countries' approach to eliminating indigenous peoples, nor from continuing to engage in genocidal policies targeted at indigenous women and girls. Today, there are more indigenous children stolen from their mothers and placed in foster care than during the height of residential schools.
Whoa!
While indigenous peoples make up only 4% of the total population of Canada, indigenous children make up 50% of all children in care. Indigenous women are the fastest growing prison population, increasing by 109% in the last decade. Indigenous women make up no less than 36% of prison population, and indigenous girls make up 53% of all youth in corrections. Indigenous women and girls have been long been the targets of sexualized violence from government agencies, police, and society. There are estimated 4,000 indigenous women and girls that have gone missing or been murdered in the last few decades. Some have emphasized the fact that because Canada now has a prime minister who is self-proclaimed feminist, that this may result in the much-needed change for indigenous women and girls. Prime Minister Trudeau did ensure that half of his cabinet positions were filled by women, most notably appointing indigenous lawyer and politician Jody Wilson-Raybould as Minister of Justice. Additionally, the three cabinet posts most relevant to indigenous women, the Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs, Minister for Status of Women, and the Minister of Health, were all staffed by women. Unfortunately, little has changed under their leadership. Once the fluffy words are separated from their actions, it is easy to see that no help is coming from Trudeau's female cabinet for indigenous women and girls.
Shameful.
Despite her reassuring words to the contrary, the health minister has also failed to take substantive action to address the indigenous suicide crisis, which is as high as 11 times the national average and is the leading cause of death for indigenous youth. Indigenous people continue to not have equal access to health care, which has exacerbated crisis-level rates of diabetes, heart disease, and stroke, especially amongst indigenous women. 93% of indigenous languages are at risk of extinction. Treaties are regularly violated. Indigenous lands continue to be taken up for mining and other extractive industries. And in the end, despite multiple overlapping crises faced by indigenous nations, and despite the dual disadvantages faced by indigenous women and girls, it was Native women themselves who educated, organized, and helped lead the largest indigenous social movement in Canada's history. The ongoing protest movement, I Don't Know More, was started by 3 Native women and a non-Native ally. Indigenous women lawyers, academics, and grassroots leaders got together and started conducting teach-ins in First Nations to help inform their people about what was happening with the legislation being imposed on their nations. The failure to abide by treaties, the many broken political promises, and the many crises killing Native people. From there, Native Americans used their familial, communal, national, and political contacts to coordinate and organize additional teach-ins, protests, rallies, and sit-ins, blockades, and press conferences. I Don't Know More became a household name, and the movement found support in many other countries, including the U.S., where indigenous communities held their own rallies and marches in support of their movement. Indigenous activism didn't start or end with I Don't Know More. Movement Native Americans have been engaging in acts of resistance since contact, and as demonstrated by these powerful Native activists, it will continue with force. Our next report on women organizing and winning in their struggle will come from India.
Hi! First of all, it is so refreshing to see all of you here. We came straight from school. Thanks for being here even in this cold, wet weather. And I'll get started with a report on India. Okay. So on New Year's Day in India, Western Coast, between 3.5 and 5 million women lined up on the National Highway 66 to form what they called the Women's Wall, Vanita Mat Hill. This became the largest public gathering of women for the cause of gender equality in India. The wall stretched out 385 miles. The demonstration was planned to create awareness of gender equality and to protest a religious ban that prevented women of menstruating age from entering one of the country's sacred Hindu temples even after the Supreme Court ruled in favor of their entry on September 28th last year. People who opposed menstruating women entering the site believed that the deity who is celibate will be tempted by women. Earlier this year, an Indian activist named Rihana Fatima made a failed attempt to become the first woman to enter a prominent Hindu temple and was arrested for exposing her thigh in a Facebook photo. Volunteers from more than 176 social and political organizations joined forces with the Kerala government to make the event happen. It was discussed for weeks on the news channels and on social media. Word spread in small towns and in rural areas through word of mouth. On New Year's Day, the organizers arranged for private buses to transport women to points along the highway. Rakhi Madhavan, a 39-year-old teacher from southern India state, of Kerala, traveled 60 miles from her hometown to join the protest. For Madhavan, this protest was deeply personal and transcended the temple ban. I've heard so many older women say that they're impure when they're menstruating, and it's disturbing, she says. I didn't want this imperishable young girl I teach to imbue the same message. I wanted to... Hey? I wanted to be a part of this because I believe it is time for awareness and for change. Even as women of all ages lined up on one side of the highway, many men, husbands, friends, and relatives lined up on the other side to show their support. Following the wall protest, 2 women entered a temple in the early hours of morning to avoid the mobs that had stopped them in the past. When the news spread that menstruating women had been in the temple, angry mobs of conservatives protested. That same day, a 3rd woman visited the temple amid the protests. The violence was disheartening, but as Madhavan says, social change doesn't happen in a day. It needs time. But with these small steps, we've made it easier for the next generation to embrace it. In this way, the Wall of Women marks a new dawn for feminism in India. As one protester remarked on Twitter, the era of women folding hands and submitting to patriarchy is the beginning to end from here. They will throw their fists on the air and demand for their rights. Women's Wall is just a beginning, a baby step of the impending cultural revolution. That's it. Thank you.
Our next report back will be from the women fighting and winning in Palestine.
Hi, everybody. Apologies in advance for any terrible mispronunciations. Hello? Oh. All right, here we go. The Great Return March is a nonviolent grassroots movement that calls for the right of return of Palestinian refugees to their homes as per the UN Resolution 194, from which they were expelled in 1948 when the State of Israel was created.
Go through your mouth.
Thousands have been participating in the mass sit-in with dozens of tents erected along the border with Israel. You've lost your sound. Hello? Do you want me to start over?
Yeah.
I could start over. All right. The Great Return March is a nonviolent grassroots movement that calls for the right of return of Palestinian refugees to their homes as per the UN Resolution 194, from which they were expelled in 1948 when the State of Israel was created. Thousands have been participating in the mass sit-in with dozens of tents erected along the border with Israel. Each tent is labeled with the name of the town that the family was expelled from in 1948. It's the largest mass protest Gaza has seen since the first Intifada. Gaza, the Palestinian territory with nearly 2 million population, can only be accessed by Egypt and Israel, but an Israeli-Egyptian blockade has been suffocating the Strip for 11 years. Living conditions have deteriorated over the years, and unemployment wavers around 43%. Residents say they have reached a breaking point. Palestinians have been protesting along Gaza's border every Friday afternoon for years. But what is noticeably different this time is that a large number of women and girls have been actively participating on a scale not seen before. So many women and girls, in fact, that some protests have been renamed Women's March of Gaza. Some 1,600 protesters, including 160 women, have been wounded and more than 30 have been killed by Israeli snipers since the Great Return March movement began on March 30th, marked as Land Day for Palestinians. Razan al-Najjar, a 21-year-old volunteer medic, was shot as she ran toward the fortified border fence east of the South Gaza city of Khan Yunis. She was trying to reach and help someone who had been shot and was murdered by Israeli snipers. Girls are also a target of Israeli violence as soldiers enter their homes and arrest them at will. Ahed Tamimi was 16 years old when she was arrested for slapping a soldier. Soldiers had shot her cousin earlier the same week and had come onto her family's property to aim their weapons at other children. Ahed spent her 17th birthday in jail. Ahed says of the occupation, "I'm not the victim of the occupation. The settler child who carries a rifle at the age of 15. They are the victims of the occupation. For me, I am capable of distinguishing between right and wrong, but not him. His view is clouded. His heart is filled with hatred and scorn against the Palestinians. He is the victim, not me. I always say I am a freedom fighter, so I will not be the victim."
Thanks. Our next report back is going to come from the women of Brazil.
The violence women face in Brazil can be represented by how they are treated in the government itself. At an all-time high of a mere 15% of federal and state legislators being women, despite making up over half of the electoral population. Those who have established themselves in high-up positions have faced dire consequences. Perhaps most notably the murder of Marielle Franco, one of the scarce black female politicians who advocated for human rights and criticized parliamentary gangs. The only female president Brazil has ever seen faced impeachment on unjust grounds and literal torture. Evangelical ideology has been encroaching upon the political realm of Brazil and strengthened with the election of Jair Bolsonaro in January. A third of Brazilians now identify as evangelicals, as do a fifth of members of the House of Representatives, whose values include opposing gay rights and abortion. Boo! His voters can be epitomized by the coined term de boi, de Bíblia e de bala, or beef, Bible, and bullets. A reference to rural voters, evangelical Christians, and pro-gun groups. Powerful businesses groups also voiced support for Bolsonaro. He has behaved in openly misogynistic ways, from stating his only female offspring as weakness of his wife to denying he would rape a woman in the Supreme Court due to her being ugly. As polling stations in Brazil closed following the country's presidential election, many Brazilian women started replacing their social media profile photos with a simple black square. Some include the word luto, which is Portuguese for mourning. However, it is also translated to I fight, which the women and activists of Brazil have certainly lived up to. The first Women United Against Bolsonaro Facebook group, created in August by Ludmila Teixeira, grew almost 4 million members in 3 weeks. Calls for protests. It was reportedly the largest women-led march in Brazil's history. The backlash of this involved the severity of death threats. However, that has not stopped the work done by those fighting for justice, and a fierce battle is still intact. In the words of Elaine Brum, a columnist for El Pai, politics is not an instant, but a process. Women may have low representation in politics in Brazil, but organize the greatest political act of 2018 elections. This is extremely powerful. Efforts to promote universal rights here will continue and will influence Brazil far beyond these elections. Thank you.
Our next report back is going to come from Argentina and the women struggling there.
Ni una menos, not one less. In 2015, the slogan became a rallying cry for Argentina against the gender violence epidemic in Latin America, which is the region with the highest femicide rates in the world. The name, Ni una menos, originated in hashtag form above a poignant cartoon which featured a young girl, her eyes downcast, holding a raised fist into the air. It was drawn in response to the death of 14-year-old Chiara Paez at the hands of her boyfriend in 2015. A story which made national headlines amid a spike in already high femicide rate in Argentina. A wave of smaller protests organized in response culminated in the immense demonstration of June 3rd. Three years on, the Ni Una Menos rally has become a central date in the calendar of the Argentine women's movement. Its latest iteration last Sunday was remarkable, not only for the massive turnout and attention it generated, but for a striking display of solidarity taken up by the marchers. Dialogue about previously taboo subjects like gender violence and reproductive rights has been embraced in public discourse. From the barked discussions one hears in the cafes and street-side asados of the capital via late-night televised debates to the floor of the National Congress. The attention courted by the Ni Una Menos gave major impetus to the wider women's movement in Argentina. That, in turn, had laid the foundations for this development. Tayo's work of small-scale, localized engagement during and after the fall of the last military dictatorship, 1976 to 1983, bore fruit, and today the shifting discourse points to a renewed struggle against a cultural something dominated by the men throughout Argentina's 200-year existence. Last year, on February 19th, the rising interest and solidarity ignited the Ni Una Menos reportedly saw thousands take to Plaza Congreso demanding legislation. Soon after, an even greater step was taken. For the first time in Argentine history, the legalization of abortion received enough support from lawmakers to be debated in the national legislature. Catholic and evangelical leaders have aggressively fought efforts to legalize abortion, and the battles continues. Earlier this year, an 11-year-old rape victim was denied an abortion. I want you to remove what the old man put inside of me, she told her doctors. The warriors for gender justice in Argentina continue to demonstrate a fierce mentality, and we stand in solidarity with them. The battle is long, but we shall continue our fight to dismantle capitalism and its oppression with our international forces and comrades.
Our next report back is going to come from the United States.
The so-called United States.
Yes.
How's everyone doing? The United States is in the grip of a wave of strikes in public schools, starting in West Virginia with a wildcat strike that took all 52 counties and raised the wage for all federal employees. The strike wave has hit Kentucky, Arizona, Oklahoma, Los Angeles, and Oakland, California, and even circled back to West Virginia. These strikes have been led by women who make up 77% of all public school teachers in the U.S. In some states, the percentage is over 80%. Since it's labeled women's work, teachers then also get classified as care work, and it is historically underpaid. Rebecca in Arizona is not just a strike leader. She's the mother of 3 children under 4. Carol Roscoe's in West Virginia is worried about children who live in abusive homes, but the state has cut funding needed to find alternatives for them. A substitute teacher in Kentucky wrote in a secret Facebook group, I just sit here and think of a 15-month-old baby girl in my family, and I'm petrified about her future. These strikes are for wages and benefits, but they are a rise from a social landscape scoured by gender and racial inequalities. The leaders of the strikes are thus not simply workers shaped only by conditions of work. Gender marks them. Last week in Oakland, a kindergarten teacher was choked and a mother was pushed as they held the protest line. Y'all hear this? This strike wave, led by women, shows no sign of stopping anytime soon, even with tensions of threats escalating. Standing in solidarity with teachers is standing in solidarity with women as they fight for a better world for our children.
Our next report is going to come from the women fighting and winning in Nigeria.
Eunice, alongside a group of other female politicians, gathered at the 2018 General Elections Aspirants Summit in Abuja last August. They stood still, their face muscles taut with determination as they chanted in unison, "No women, no nation." It was a call to arms for Nigeria's female politicians, held to support them in the country's national polls next year. For decades, Nigerian politics has remained a male stronghold, often snuffing out challenges for women even before they can seriously contest for top political posts. Nigeria's women are making an unprecedented push to upturn a political system that has consistently denied them. Eunice, a lawyer and businesswoman, is one of 3 female candidates who won nominations for their parties to contest the February presidential elections. Obi, last initial E, a chartered accountant, and Funamilayo is a linguistics professor, are the 2 others who joined Eunice in a field with 34 male candidates, including President Muhammadu Buhari. Never before had more than one woman contested in any Nigerian presidential election. Nigeria's female politicians received financial support. The Nigerian Women's Trust Fund, or the NWTF, founded in 2011 by public and private sector individuals to help female politicians fund campaigns, first received a grant of $15,000 in 2015 from the African Women's Development Fund, which supports women's groups. In July 2018, the AWDF increased the support to $138,800. Agencies like the UN, agencies like UN Women, through an advocacy program called Women and Democracy in Nigeria, are backing these efforts. The road ahead is long, but the rise of female candidates and their increasingly uncompromising push for greater political space shows that change is afoot. I see that in the future, Nigeria would be having more and young, powerful women coming out to contest. 2018 is different from anything Nigeria has seen before with regards to women fighting for political space. We are working together to ensure that more women get through in the coming elections, say Eunice. It doesn't matter what political platform we are contesting on. We are all going to help each other.
Our last report back is going to come from Hungary and Poland.
Hello! International Women's Day. Remember Poland and Hungary? As you know, they're going through some light fascism right now. In Hungary, the return of Viktor Orban and the Fidesz party. Yeah, they have a very strong executive there who's been trying to overturn the courts. The women have been detrimental here, involved with the immigrant, because it's a migrant country. And so they've been trying to reinstate what we had in Hungary 20 years ago when the first migrants started coming through. And then in Poland, where they have a different setup with the Senate and the same Congress, there's no control over the courts. And the courts on their own tried to overthrow or overturn abortion rights. And 2 years ago on this day, in weather like this, a lot colder, but but you know what cold has been the last 3 weeks here. They turned out with their umbrellas, 9 million women in the streets. Yes. No, it's on the back of my back here. And that's amazing. What's the population of Poland? 90 million. So let's remember the women on this day. They are fighting. They're the last stop before fascism.
Thank you. So let's remember on International Women's Day to center the international aspect of this. As women in the imperialist core, we have to recognize that the struggle and the fight to dismantle the cis-heteropatriarchy is also the struggle and the fight to dismantle imperialism and colonialism.
Okay. Governor March. Okay. So before we go, I just want to give some credence to this. Okay, so we know that there are a lot of people who call themselves feminists, whose feminism is not intersectional, right? They could care less about women in the third world that are suffering under colonialism. They could care less about women who have to sleep on the street because we have this incredible notion that housing should be treated like a commodity. They treat women of color like they're not as deserving of them to lead the movement as they are. And finally, they tell trans women that they're not women at all and that they don't have a place in the movement. So we say with the International Women's Strike, hell no. Trans women too. Hell no. Trans women too. So I'm gonna have one final, and if someone is from a different part of the world and you want to give a message about where you're from, make your way over here. I'm gonna close by talking a little bit about Puerto Rico, one of the world's last colonies. You know, they call it a commonwealth, but we know what it really is. The entire economy of the island of Puerto Rico is run by an appointed board called the Fiscal Control Board. The people have no self-determination about public spaces, wages, and the expected conditions that people can think that they're entitled to is being ripped away from them. I just want to spread the word. I just want to let everybody know that the United States is very much an empire, and its boot is on the neck of every Puerto Rican on the island and in the diaspora. So I just want to let you know that when we call the U.S., Paige just said it, the imperialist core, the seat of empire, when we talk about imperialism, we have a colony, multiple colonies in our possession. It's not okay, and we have to always fight against it. So I just want to say thank you all for being here. If anybody doesn't have any closing words, we're gonna march. You see the purple banner? Hey, Gabs! I say Gabs! They're gonna be leading us. They're gonna head out. Stay together and stay tight. Stay with your friends. Stay close. And I'm gonna be holding down the back. I got everybody's back. Okay, so lead us out. I love y'all. Okay, all right, lead us. Follow them. Okay.
Get some bread. Eat some bread.
Eat some bread.
We got bread. We got baked goodies.
Hey, it's $7.80 now, so please.
Take whatever.
Okay.
You're not a rando.
We will not bow down to racism. We will not bow down to injustice.
Okay, you ready?
We will not bow down to exploitation.
All right, let's get everybody in front of us. Let's march out. Umbrellas, come on.
It's VO,
okay.
so it's not back live, but at least it's...
I love you.
Show
tripod and umbrella, put it in the studio for me. I'll just mark it for you guys. Yeah, I guess. All right. Yeah. So you got this for me? You put, yeah. Okay.
Are y'all all doing security?
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
Women's struggle is my struggle! 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 Women's struggle is my struggle!
Better food.
Stand up, fight back! Stand up, fight back! What do we do? Stand up, fight back! What do we do? Rise up, fight back! When trans women's rights are under attack, what do we do? Rise up, fight back! What do we do? Stand up, fight back! When women's rights are under attack, what do we do? Stand up, fight back! 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 Women's rights are under attack! What do we do? Stand up, fight back! What do we do? Stand up, fight back! What do we do? Stand up, fight back! Women's rights are under attack! What do we do? Stand up, fight back! What do we do? Stand up, fight back! What do we do? Stand up, fight back!
Women's rights, kind of women's march. Good. They want equal rights.
Oh, okay.
Fair, just fairness all around.
I thought this was bad. That's all.
Oh, no, they're all right. KTW, Jam Lake. How you doing today?
Good.
Good.
How about you?
All right. Yeah, I was here prior too. What's that? Yeah, they're gonna meet up with these guys. Yeah.
We've hit every light so far. wave all day.
I know, right?
International Women's Strike! International Women's Strike!
International Women's Strike!
International Women's Strike!
International Women's Strike!
Give yourselves a round! If anybody has any final reflections, what did you feel taking the streets? How did you feel feeling about the stories of women in struggle and winning across the world? I want to let everybody know that you're invited to the after party. We're going to be at Cider Riot. Cider Riot is one of our sponsors of the march this year and the rally. We love them very much. One of the sites of some of the best organizing happening in the city. They don't have any liquor, but you know, we can go somewhere else. If anybody doesn't have any final words, we're gonna do a happy hour and get out of this cold and rain, all right? I'll see y'all next year. Well, I'm gonna see y'all in the streets in between, right? Okay. I love y'all. Cider Riot is on, what is it? Cool Chennai. Southeast. Or north.